A teacher scolded the son of the Aryan Brotherhood's leader. When the boss showed up, everything changed. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Lincoln High School in Riverside, California, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floors. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her reading glasses and surveyed her 10th grade English classroom, a space she'd occupied for the past 12 years. The walls were decorated with literary quotes and student artwork, a small sanctuary she'd built in a neighborhood that had seen better days. At 42, Sarah had learned to navigate the complexities of teaching in a school where gang affiliation often ran through family lines like inherited traits. Her students filed in with the usual mixture of enthusiasm and reluctance. Among them was Tyler Jensen, a lanky 16-year-old with close-cropped blonde hair and a perpetual scowl. He slumped into his desk in the back row, headphones dangling around his neck, radiating the kind of defiance that Sarah recognized all too well. Tyler was smart when he wanted to be, but lately he'd been testing boundaries, pushing limits, seeing how far he could go before someone pushed back. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now let's continue. The lesson was on To Kill a Mockingbird, a text Sarah chose specifically because it dealt with prejudice and moral courage. As she discussed Atticus Finch's decision to defend Tom Robinson, Tyler snorted loudly, causing several students to turn around. "Something funny, Mr. Jensen?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice level. "Yeah, actually," Tyler said, leaning back in his chair. "This whole book is garbage. Some white knight trying to save everyone. That's not how the real world works." Sarah took a deep breath. She'd dealt with provocative comments before, but something in Tyler's tone felt different today, more aggressive. "I'd be interested in hearing your perspective if you'd like to share it respectfully." "Respectfully?" Tyler laughed. You want to talk about respect? How about respecting that some people don't belong in certain places? How about respecting that mixing everything up just makes things worse?" The classroom fell silent. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. She'd heard enough coded language in her years of teaching to know exactly what Tyler was implying. Several students of color in the room shifted uncomfortably, and Maria Rodriguez, usually one of the more vocal students, looked down at her desk. "That's enough," Sarah said firmly. "Tyler, I need you to step outside, now." Tyler's eyes flashed with anger. "You can't tell me what to do. I can, and I just did, outside. We're going to have a conversation about appropriate classroom behavior." For a moment, Tyler just stared at her, and Sarah wondered if he would refuse. But then he stood up, knocking his chair back deliberately, and stalked toward the door. "Whatever. My dad's going to hear about this." "I'm sure he will," Sarah replied calmly, though her hands were trembling slightly. In the hallway, away from the other students, Sarah confronted Tyler directly. "What you said in there wasn't just disrespectful to me. It was harmful to your classmates. This classroom is supposed to be a safe space for everyone." Tyler crossed his arms. "You don't know anything about the real world, Ms. Mitchell. You live in your little bubble with your books and your ideas about how things should be. But out there?" He gestured vaguely toward the windows. "Out there, it's different. You stick with your own. That's how you survive." "Where are you learning this, Tyler? Because I know you. I've seen your work. You're smarter than this hateful rhetoric." "It's not hateful. It's truth. And my family doesn't appreciate people like you trying to brainwash me with your liberal propaganda." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She'd heard rumors about Tyler's family, whispers in the teacher's lounge about his father's affiliations, but she'd never confirmed anything. "This isn't about politics, Tyler. This is about basic human decency. I'm going to have to write this up and contact your parents." Tyler's face hardened. "Do whatever you want. My dad will handle it." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety. Sarah filled out the incident report, met briefly with the vice principal, and tried to focus on her other classes. But Tyler's words kept echoing in her mind. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted. The next morning, Sarah arrived at school early, as was her habit. She liked the quiet hours before students arrived, time to prepare lessons and grade papers. She was at her desk, red pen in hand, when Principal Robert Chen knocked on her doorframe. "Sarah, can I see you in my office?" Something in his tone made her stomach drop. She followed him down the hallway, past the trophy cases and peeling motivational posters, to his small office that smelled of coffee and old books. "We have a situation," Chen said, closing the door behind them. "Tyler Jensen's father called last night. He's coming in this morning. He wants to discuss the incident with Tyler." "That's standard procedure," Sarah said, though her mouth felt dry. "I'm happy to explain what happened." Chen rubbed his temples. "Sarah, there's something you should know. James Jensen is, well, he has a reputation. I've made some calls. He's allegedly connected to some dangerous people, the Aryan Brotherhood." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah had read about the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the most violent prison gangs in America, with roots that extended far beyond prison walls. They were involved in drug trafficking, murder for hire, and organized crime throughout California. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" Sarah asked quietly. "I'm saying we need to be careful. I've asked for a school resource officer to be present, and I want you to know that you have the full support of the administration. What Tyler said was unacceptable, and you did the right thing." At 9:30, James Jensen walked through the front doors of Lincoln High School. Sarah watched from Chen's office window as he crossed the parking lot. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos that disappeared under his black t-shirt. His head was shaved, and he wore sunglasses despite the overcast morning. 2 other men flanked him, similarly dressed, similarly imposing. Chen's secretary buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Jensen is here." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd faced down aggressive parents before, dealt with threats and accusations, but this felt different. This felt dangerous in a way that made her question every decision that had led to this moment. James Jensen entered the office, and his presence seemed to fill the small space. He removed his sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes that swept over Sarah with an assessing gaze. Behind him, Officer Martinez stood near the door, hand resting casually but deliberately near his duty belt. "Mr. Jensen," Chen began, standing, "thank you for coming in. I'm Principal Chen, and this is Ms. Mitchell, Tyler's English teacher." Jensen didn't sit down. He stood there towering over the desk, his jaw tight. "My son came home yesterday upset, said his teacher kicked him out of class for expressing an opinion." Sarah found her voice. "That's not exactly what happened, Mr. Jensen. Tyler made statements in class that were discriminatory and created a hostile environment for other students." "What kind of statements?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "He made comments suggesting that certain groups of people don't belong together, that integration is harmful. When I asked him to stop, he became defiant." Jensen's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying my son isn't allowed to have an opinion in your class?" "He's welcome to have opinions," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady, "but not ones that demean or threaten other students. There are rules about hate speech." The room fell silent. Jensen studied Sarah for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing options, considering responses. This was a man used to intimidation, to getting his way through presence and implication. Finally, Jensen spoke, his voice low and measured. "Ms. Mitchell, can I speak with you privately?" Chen immediately shook his head. "That's not appropriate, Mr. Jensen. Anything you need to say can be said here." "I'm not going to hurt her," Jensen said, still looking at Sarah. I just want to talk. Teacher to parent. No administrators, no cops. 5 minutes. Every instinct told Sarah to refuse, but something in Jensen's expression made her pause. Beneath the hardness, she saw something else. Uncertainty, maybe, or calculation of a different kind. It's okay, she heard herself say. 5 minutes. Chen looked alarmed. Sarah, I don't think it's fine. We'll just be in my classroom. The door stays open. She led Jensen down the hallway, acutely aware of his heavy footsteps behind her. Her classroom felt different with him in it. Smaller, somehow. He looked around at the decorations, the quotes on the walls, the student work pinned to bulletin boards. You really believe all this? He asked, gesturing at a poster that read, Diverse voices, shared stories. I do, Sarah said simply. I believe education is about opening minds, not closing them. Jensen was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. Tyler's mother died 3 years ago. Cancer. Since then, he's been angry at the world. Looking for somewhere to belong. Sarah felt a flicker of compassion despite her fear. I'm sorry for your loss, but Mr. Jensen, the path he's going down, it's going to destroy his future. He's a smart kid. He could go to college, make something of himself. Make something of himself? Jensen's voice hardened again. What, like you? Standing in this classroom, making 30 grand a year, thinking you're changing the world? I'm trying to give these kids options, Sarah said. Tools to think critically, to make their own choices. No, you're trying to make them think like you, see the world like you see it. I'm trying to teach them empathy, Sarah corrected, to understand people who are different from them, to question hate. Jensen moved closer, and Sarah instinctively stepped back. But he didn't threaten her. Instead, he looked at the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on her desk. I read this book once, he said quietly. In prison. Had a lot of time to read in prison. Sarah waited, sensing that something important was about to happen. You know what I learned in prison, Miss Mitchell? I learned that the world is divided, us and them. Inside those walls, you choose a side, or you die. It's that simple. But this isn't prison, Sarah said softly. These are children. They don't have to choose sides. They don't have to live in your world. Jensen's jaw clenched. Tyler is my son. He's already in my world. And I came here to tell you to back off, to leave him alone, to stop trying to change him. Is that really what you want? Sarah asked, and she heard the tremor in her own voice. For Tyler to end up where you did, in prison or worse? The question hung between them, dangerous and raw. For a moment, Sarah thought she'd gone too far, that she'd pushed too hard. Jensen's face flushed, his hands clenched into fists. But then something shifted. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he looked away. You don't understand, he said, and his voice was different now, tired. I can't protect him out there if he goes soft, if he starts thinking everyone's his friend. The world doesn't work that way. Maybe your world doesn't, Sarah said gently, but it doesn't have to be his world. You have a choice, Mr. Jensen. You can let him find a different path. Before Jensen could respond, Tyler appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide. Dad, what are you doing here? Jensen straightened, and the hardness returned to his features like a mask sliding back into place. Came to talk to your teacher about her problem with you expressing yourself. Tyler looked between them, uncertain. It's fine, Dad. It was just a stupid argument. Can we go? In a minute. Jensen turned back to Sarah. My son is going to stay in your class, and you're going to teach him whatever's in your curriculum. But Miss Mitchell? He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. Remember that he's watching. He's learning from you whether you want him to or not. So you better make sure you're teaching him the right things. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was something more complicated, a challenge maybe, or a plea disguised as a warning. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll do my best to teach all my students to think for themselves and treat others with respect. Jensen held her gaze for another moment, then turned to his son. Let's go, Tyler. You're already late for second period. As they left, Tyler glanced back at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or the first stirrings of doubt about everything he'd been taught. Over the following weeks, Sarah noticed changes in Tyler. He still sat in the back of the classroom, still wore the same defiant expression, but he was quieter now. He listened more. When they discussed the trial scene in To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus questions the witnesses, Tyler raised his hand for the first time in months. Yes, Tyler, Sarah said, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice. Why does Atticus do it? He asked. Defend Tom Robinson, I mean. He knows he's going to lose. He knows the town is going to hate him. So why bother? Sarah considered the question carefully. What do you think? Tyler was quiet for a moment. Maybe because some things are more important than winning, like doing what's right, even when it's hard. The classroom was silent. Maria Rodriguez looked at Tyler with something like respect in her eyes. Other students nodded slowly. That's exactly right, Sarah said softly. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is stand up for what we believe in, even when we're standing alone. Tyler looked down at his desk, and Sarah thought she saw the slightest crack in his armor. That afternoon, as Sarah was packing up her classroom, Tyler appeared in her doorway. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets. Ms. Mitchell. Tyler, what can I do for you? He shuffled his feet. I just wanted to say what I said before, in class, about people not belonging together. That was wrong. I was being a jerk. Sarah set down the papers she'd been holding. Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. My dad said something to me after we left that day. He said he'd made a lot of mistakes in his life, but the biggest one was letting anger make his decisions. He said I was smarter than that. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Your father sounds like he's trying to do right by you. He also said that if I'm going to have opinions, I better be able to back them up with facts, not just feelings. And that I should listen to people who know more than me, even if I don't agree with them at first. That's good advice. Tyler nodded. So, I was thinking maybe I could do some extra credit. Write an essay or something, about prejudice and how it affects communities, if that's okay. I think that would be excellent, Tyler. As he turned to leave, Tyler paused. Ms. Mitchell? Thanks for not giving up on me. I know I made it hard. That's what teachers do, Sarah said with a smile. We don't give up. After he left, Sarah sat at her desk for a long time, thinking about the strange encounter with James Jensen, about the fear she'd felt, and the unexpected conversation that had followed. She thought about Tyler's transformation, about the crack that had formed in the wall of hate that had been built around him. She couldn't change the world. She couldn't reform the Aryan Brotherhood, or eliminate gang violence, or solve all of society's problems. But she could reach one student. She could plant one seed of doubt in a mind that had been taught to hate. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next morning, Sarah found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a short note written in neat handwriting. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for seeing my son as a person, not just a problem. Thank you for being brave enough to push back when he needed it. I can't promise he won't struggle. The pull of family loyalty is strong. But you gave him something I couldn't. A different perspective, a choice. Whatever he decides, at least it will be his decision, made with his eyes open. That's more than I had at his age. Respectfully, James Jensen. Sarah folded the note carefully and tucked it into her desk drawer. Outside her window, students were arriving for the day, a diverse mix of faces and backgrounds, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles. She thought about Atticus Finch, about the courage it took to fight battles you knew you might lose. She thought about the small victories that made the larger war worth fighting. As her students filed in, Tyler among them, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she taught, not for the moments of obvious triumph, but for these small shifts, these tiny cracks in the armor of ignorance and hate. For the possibility that one conversation, one book, one question might change a life. Tyler took his seat and pulled out his copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He caught Sarah's eye and gave her a small nod. She nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they'd both taken over the past weeks. The classroom settled, and Sarah began her lesson. Outside, the California sun burned away the morning fog, and in that small space, filled with students and books and possibility, another day of teaching, of reaching, of hoping began. Months passed, and the school year moved toward its conclusion. Tyler continued to evolve, slowly shedding the rhetoric he'd been taught and developing his own voice. He joined the school debate team, much to everyone's surprise, and began to argue passionately about social issues, using evidence and logic rather than hatred and fear. His relationship with his father remained complicated. James Jensen didn't suddenly transform into a civil rights activist, but he kept his promise to let Tyler make his own choices. He attended Tyler's debate competitions, sitting in the back row, arms crossed, but present. He listened as his son argued for criminal justice reform, for educational equality, for the kind of world that existed outside the prison walls where Jensen had learned his hardest lessons. One evening, after a particularly successful debate competition, Sarah saw Jensen waiting in the parking lot. He approached her as she walked to her car. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Jensen." Sarah felt the old wariness return, but it was tempered now by months of watching Tyler grow. "I wanted to tell you something," Jensen said. He looked uncomfortable, like the words didn't come easily. Tyler got accepted to college. UC Riverside, full scholarship. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That's wonderful. He's earned it." Jensen nodded slowly. "He wants to study criminal justice, says he wants to understand why people like me make the choices we make, says maybe he can help change things from the inside." "That's ambitious. That's your influence," Jensen said. "You made him believe he could be more than what I am." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I just showed him options. He's the one who chose to take them." Jensen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I won't pretend I've changed who I am. I won't pretend my life is suddenly different. But Tyler, he has a chance I never had, to be something better. And that's because you didn't back down when you should have been afraid." "I was afraid," Sarah admitted, "but sometimes being brave means acting despite the fear." Jensen almost smiled. "Yeah, I think Tyler's learning that too." He turned to walk away, then stopped. "Ms. Mitchell, in that book you teach, the one about the mockingbird, Atticus loses the trial, right? But his kids learn something important anyway." "Yes," Sarah said. "They learn that doing the right thing matters even when you lose." Jensen nodded slowly. Maybe that's not such a bad lesson after all. As he walked away, Sarah stood in the empty parking lot, watching the sun set over the school. She thought about all the students she'd taught over the years, all the battles won and lost, all the small victories that added up to something larger than herself. Tyler Jensen would go to college. He would study and grow and challenge everything he'd been taught. He might stumble. He might struggle with the legacy of his father's choices, but he would do it with his eyes open, with the tools she'd given him, with the courage to question and the wisdom to listen. And maybe, just maybe, he would break the cycle. Maybe he would be the one to prove that change was possible, that people could choose different paths, that the sins of the father didn't have to become the sins of the son. Sarah got into her car and drove home through streets that had seen too much violence, too much hate, too much fear. But somewhere in those streets, a student she'd reached was planning a different future. And somewhere in those streets, a father who'd lived a hard life was letting his son go towards something better. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real life rarely offered perfect endings, but it was enough. It was a beginning, a possibility, a crack of light in the darkness. And in the work of teaching, of reaching across divides, of planting seeds in uncertain soil, sometimes that was all you could hope for. Sometimes that was everything. 3 years later, Sarah Mitchell stood at the back of a university lecture hall, watching as Tyler Jensen presented his research on gang intervention programs. He'd grown taller, more confident, his voice steady as he spoke about breaking cycles of violence through education and opportunity. The audience consisted of criminology students, professors, and several community organizers. Tyler clicked through his presentation slides, each one filled with data and case studies, but his conclusion was personal. "I grew up believing that loyalty meant following a predetermined path," Tyler said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "That questioning the worldview I inherited was betrayal. But I had a teacher who showed me that real loyalty is to truth, to growth, to becoming better than what we were." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She hadn't told Tyler she was coming today, wanting to see him in his element without the pressure of performance. After the presentation, as students crowded around Tyler with questions, Sarah slipped toward the exit. But a familiar voice stopped her. Leaving without saying hello. She turned to find Tyler grinning at her, his presentation materials tucked under his arm. Behind him stood a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, Maria Rodriguez, his former classmate, and now, according to the Christmas card Sarah had received, his girlfriend. "You were wonderful," Sarah said, embracing him. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Tyler said simply. "You know that, right? Everything I am now started in your classroom." They walked together across campus, catching up on the years that had passed. Tyler shared that he'd been accepted into a graduate program focusing on prison reform. Maria was studying social work. Together, they volunteered at a youth center in Riverside, working with at-risk kids who reminded Tyler of himself. "How's your father?" Sarah asked carefully. Tyler's expression grew complicated. "He's trying. He doesn't come to all my presentations anymore. Says some of what I talk about hits too close to home. But he showed up to my graduation. Sat next to Maria's parents. I think that was hard for him, but he did it." "That's growth," Sarah observed. "Small steps," Tyler agreed. "He wrote me a letter last month. Said he was sorry for a lot of things, that he wished he'd had someone like you when he was my age. Maybe things would have been different." Sarah thought about that encounter in her classroom years ago, about the fear and the unexpected conversation that followed. About how one moment of courage, Tyler's, hers, even James Jensen's, had created ripples that extended far beyond what any of them could have imagined. "You're doing important work, Tyler. You're proving that change is possible." "We're doing important work," Tyler corrected. "Every teacher who refuses to give up on a difficult student, every parent who lets their kid choose a different path, every person who questions what they've been taught, we're all part of it." As Sarah drove home that evening, the California sky painted in shades of orange and purple, she thought about the long arc of education, of influence, of hope. She thought about all the Tyler Jensens still sitting in classrooms, waiting for someone to see beyond their anger to the potential underneath. Tomorrow, she would return to Lincoln High School, to another year of students and challenges and small victories. But tonight, She allowed herself to feel the weight of this one success, this one life changed, this one cycle broken. In her rearview mirror, the university campus grew smaller, but the impact of what happened there would continue to grow. Tyler would reach other students, those students would reach others. And somewhere in that chain of influence, Sarah's courage on one autumn morning would keep echoing forward. It wasn't about saving everyone. It was about saving someone, and trusting that someone to save someone else.